Since these two are still alive, there's no reason that these two shouldn't still be alive as well. So I did that story a few weeks ago, and there's someone else that I feel like should be mentioned within that time frame. This baby here, and this story is even hard for me to tell, so bear with me. So George Stinney Jr. was born October 21st, 1929, and in 1944, he was living with his mother, father, and his siblings in Alkaloo, South Carolina. It was a working class neighborhood that was segregated by train tracks like most areas were at that time. His family lived a pretty normal life. His father worked at a sawmill, the kids went to school, they went to church, just your regular American family. Then on March 23rd, 1944, two young white girls were out riding their bikes looking for flowers around the neighborhood. They apparently passed the Stinney home where they asked George and his sister if they knew where a particular type of flower was. The kids pointed them in the right direction and went on about their day. Sadly, those two girls wound up dead. No one knows how. Their bodies were found in a ditch, and immediately George and his older brother John were arrested on suspicion of the murders. Now, John was eventually released, but they kept George there, stating that he made a confession about the murders. Now, George remained there for several weeks, and in that time he was not able to meet with a lawyer. He was not even able to see his parents until after his trial and conviction. Due to threats of lynching, George's father actually had to quit his job at the sawmill, and the entire family had to flee. For his trial, George was not allowed any support in the courtroom. His family couldn't come. No black people were allowed in the courtroom at all, but there were reported about 500 white people who attended, and of course he also had an all-white jury. Now, the girls were said to have had blunt force trauma to the head. The trial lasted exactly 1 day, and the jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes before they determined that George Stinney was guilty of murdering both of these young girls. It was finally at that time that George was able to spend a few short moments with his parents, and at that point he told them he had never written or signed any sort of confession. In fact, he had been bribed. They told him if he confessed to the murders, that they would release him and that they would actually let him eat, as they had been starving him for multiple days. George was sentenced to death by way of the electric chair on June 16, 1944. He was actually too small for the chair. He had to sit on a Bible as a booster seat to be able to reach the chair. Witnesses that observed his execution said that his face was stained with tears. After his death, he was buried in an unmarked grave.